A sword is held to the neck of a girl who is thinking about what a strange place to die. So far from home that no one will even know of her death under the hot sun in this god-forsaken place. The man standing over the stranger grips the sword tightly in his hand. He asks what his victim's last words will be. The girl smiles nervously and thinks how unfair and strange it looks from the outside. The Cromwell Empire was rightly considered the leading power of the North. It was not for nothing that it was called the ruler of the North. It was in this country that the girl had previously lived in luxury and wealth. There she had luxurious dresses, rich jewelry, and expensive things. But all this did not bring her much satisfaction. All the time she wanted something more and more meaningful for her life. Inside, the girl wanted to travel and explore the world in which she lived. The thirst for travel stirred her mind. Every time she reached new places, her blood boiled, and so began her life as a traveler and explorer. She went everywhere, starting with visits to prehistoric landmarks of the Northern Empire and ending with the homes of the Fens in Siberia. In a short period of time, the girl visited all the famous places of the northern continent, and then it was time to head south. Her path lay through a vast desert to the southern country of Kratia. A week had passed since she got lost. The traveler could not find a way out of the desert because there were no other landmarks around except sand. There were no roads around. Even worse, her supplies were running out. She had no water left at all. And just then, she noticed some silhouettes in the distance on the horizon. It was hard to tell if it was a group of people or a mirage. With her last ounce of strength, the girl ran toward the people. She shouted loudly and begged them not to leave her in that hellish place. Finally, when she reached the travelers, she thanked God and asked them to take her with them. After calming down a little, the girl asked if the men knew how to get to Kratia, because she had lost her bearings in the desert and now had no idea which direction to go in order to reach the settlement. Then one of the strangers pointed his sword at the traveler's throat. She thought that Kratia and the lands of this traveler were enemies, or that she had said something she shouldn't have. And then the stranger asked her what her last words would be. The girl remained silent. She thought about the absurdity and injustice of the situation. The man had already swung his sword, because if the girl did not want to say her last words, then they had no time to waste on nonsense. The girl asked him to wait, because she had not even had time to think of her last wish before dying. She assured him that he could put away his sword, because it was inappropriate in this situation. The stranger stopped. He did not understand why he should put away his weapon. Meanwhile, the girl said that she was the most beautiful woman on the continent, and therefore could not simply die in an unknown desert. She was confident that she would be able to charm the stranger with her beauty. The girl turned to the man and said that every country had principles and laws to protect beautiful women from danger. After all, it was only natural to protect something that brought joy and pleasure to the eye. She asked the men surrounding her if this was not true and fair for the stronger sex, but her words did not have the desired effect. The stranger again raised his weapon above her head. He was completely unimpressed by her words about beauty and its protection. He still wanted to kill the stranger. The traveler realized that she now needed to dodge the sword blow. At the last moment, she shouted not to wave the sword in front of her face. This was against the rules in civilized countries. The man asked what rules she was talking about when it came to killing a person. Either way, one person would die, and the other would live on and enjoy life. The girl noticed that the stranger had very beautiful, intense eyes. This was definitely not something to think about before dying. But the man's beauty was somehow demonic and attracted her with an animal magnetism. The traveler noticed that her potential killer was getting closer to her. The thought ran through her head that she shouldn't relax, because he might still want to kill her in a bloody way. The stranger looked intently into her eyes. The traveler thought that her plan to seduce him with her beauty might work, and now she would have a new ally and guide in these wild lands. The man said that he had changed his mind about killing her. Therefore, she should be grateful to him for saving her worthless life. The last word was spoken with a certain hostility and even condescension. After that, the traveler did not remember what happened. She came to her senses in some basement. There were shackles and chains around her. It looked like a prison. The heat dried the air and the girl wanted to drink. An unfamiliar man stood in the doorway to her cell. He was most likely a guard. He was holding a bucket of water, and when he saw that the prisoner had regained consciousness, He poured the contents of the bucket directly onto the floor. He also told the girl that she should be grateful for the water, because no one knew how long she would last without water in such heat. The sad prospect did not allow the girl to calm down. She did not want to die in captivity, but she had to find the positives in this situation. Thanks to this shower, she finally came to her senses and woke up from the sleep she had fallen into while still in the desert. Now she seemed to understand where she was and what was happening. The prison where she found herself was built in a tower right in the center of the city. The sun was so hot that one could die from the heat. In addition, the girl began to understand where she was. Judging by the way people were dressed, the heat on the streets, and how they treated people who aroused suspicion or were simply strangers, this was the country of the desert king, Pisian. Her native country, Cromwell, was located in the north of the continent. Pisian was in the south. It was a very large country. At that time, it was also the most powerful in the political arena. But for her personally, it was important that Pisian was very aggressive towards her native country. That is why she tried in every way to avoid this country when traveling to the south of the continent. It was imperative to prevent everyone from finding out where she came from and where she was going. Now was not the time to lose faith. The prison was built specifically to torture people with heat. The girl was not used to such temperatures. Therefore, she could easily die in such conditions. And that meant only one thing. She had to escape from there as quickly as possible, by any means necessary. When she looked out the window to study her surroundings, she noticed the same man who had tried to kill her in the desert. His eyes were fixed on her, as if he knew that the traveler was watching him. Strangely, the traveler remembered her childhood. She knew that she had inherited her beauty and hair from her mother. Her mother wanted her daughter to grow up and become a true elegant lady. Every time the girl ran away from home in search of adventure, her mother was very angry and almost went mad with rage at her rebellious, disobedient child. She often locked her daughter in her room, but she was not the kind of child who would be punished by her parents and forced to stay in her room for a long time and think about her behavior. From an early age, the girl learned to pick the locks on her door. This made her a real expert at picking locks and escaping from locked rooms on any floor and in any building. Thanks to this, she learned many tricks that helped her in life. Physical training and self-education, which she engaged in during her free time, helped her develop in all areas. As a result, the girl learned not to give up even in the most difficult situations, for which she thanked fate. Finally, she got out of prison. After all, there was no place for a beauty like her there. First, she needed to find some local clothes so as not to attract attention and arouse suspicion with her attire. Local women had to hide their faces from the men around them so as not to tempt them. The girl found this tradition silly and unjustified, but in this situation, it would help her escape. The traveler remembered what she had read about Pisian in books. They spoke of a powerful state inhabited by free and strong people who had built their power in the sands with their own hands and willpower. And although it was strange, even then she wanted to visit this country for at least a day and see with her own eyes how people lived there. Even though her homeland was at war with this people, how could she have imagined then that one day she would be kidnapped right in the desert, and she would find herself in this legendary country completely against her will? Everything around her amazed and confused her imagination. The hot air burned her lungs with every breath. The houses and buildings around her were made of sand. And among the local population, there were actually many representatives of different nationalities. The girl realized that despite her situation, this country was actually much better than the one she knew from books. She felt like she had landed on another planet. That was why she loved to travel. Overcome with joy, the girl couldn't contain her emotions and screamed. Although in reality, she should have controlled herself and calmed down so as not to attract the attention of the guards and end up back in the dungeon. She needed to find a place to spend the night and then make plans for the future. Although the next step would definitely be to find food, because only now did she realize how long it had been since she had eaten. The man who had threatened her in the desert was walking among the crowd again. The girl pulled herself together and quickly made her way through the crowd. It was much easier to get lost in such a crowd, so she had every chance of escaping. Besides, her face was covered, and the man might not even remember her after that encounter. He must have had many more important things to do. so she needed to calmly go about her business and not show her anxiety. But suddenly the stranger stood right in front of her. The girl was afraid that she had been noticed and would be put back in prison. The man said that she reminded him of a rat that had escaped from a trap. He held her hand tightly. The stranger asked her to tell him how she had managed to do it. But he was interrupted by a crowd of men led by a young man who called the stranger Sikh. Sikh said he was leaving the woman to him. With coldness in his voice, he ordered them to watch over the girl and not disappoint him. The guards dragged the traveler away. She could not understand what fate awaited her, but fear did not leave her. Sikad and his acquaintance walked down the palace corridor. They talked about the girl and how she had managed to escape from the dungeon. The man said that even in the desert, he had noticed how the stranger differed from their women. His friend asked Sikad why he couldn't use her for his own purposes. The girl, of course, behaved aggressively, but her manner of speaking and her aura indicated that she was no ordinary commoner. His friend said that in his opinion, the girl could be the daughter of some prince or ruler from the northern continent. His intuition told him so. Therefore, she could be used as an informant. She could pass on the information they had prepared during her journey from Cromwell to Cradia. But Sihad said he was ready to take the girl into his harem. This proposal confused his companion. The girl was brought to the palace. An older woman told her to follow her. The traveler looked around with surprise and curiosity, wondering where they were going. Everything around her was beautifully decorated and very spacious. The woman led the girl to a hall where there were 3 other young women. Alice asked who all these women were and what they were doing there. A guess flashed through her mind, but she was not yet ready to believe it. The woman grabbed Alice by the collar. The girl was not used to such treatment. She began to struggle and warn them not to touch her. But her efforts were in vain. The girl was left in her underwear. Then she was thrown into a large pool. The women bustled around her and began bathing her. The tired traveler liked it, but it could have been done in a more civilized manner. She was very surprised by everything that had happened since she was kidnapped in the desert and brought to the palace. Sihad had some intention for her, but for now, it remained a secret. The women who bathed her brought her clothes. She doubted that she wanted to wear such a dress, if it could be called that. The Eastern manners confused her more and more each time. Sikad sat in his room. His servant remarked that his master was in a very cheerful mood, which had not happened for a long time. The ruler agreed that he was indeed in a good mood today, as he had managed to catch the runaway. Meanwhile, Alice was examining her new clothes. She couldn't believe that women here wore such things. In a country where they were forbidden to show their faces, their stomachs were exposed for all to see. The girl thought that she had agreed to dress like this only because she was afraid that she would be forced to wear these clothes. And then she remembered her belongings, which had disappeared after she was undressed. But the most important thing was that her account book was missing. Without it, she would not be able to prove her identity during her journey, if it happened, of course. This was very bad. It was worth looking for it in this place. Despite everything, she believed that she had a trump card up her sleeve. It was a magic ring that concealed her true identity. It mimicked light eyes and ribbed hair in shades of brown. Thanks to this artifact, she had been able to travel all this time without fear that someone would recognize her and reveal her identity. The woman who approached her ordered her to follow her immediately. An unpleasant feeling followed Alice throughout her journey through the palace corridors. The woman led her further and further into the depths of the palace. The girl wondered where they were headed. Finally, they reached a lavishly furnished room. The woman informed Alice that from now on she would live here while she was in the ruler's harem. The traveler liked the room. That is, until she realized what the word harem meant. In the girl's mind, a harem was a place where a rich man kept several women, or even more, just to do whatever he wanted with them. The woman confirmed Alice's guess. The girl fell to the floor. She still couldn't believe that she would be put in a harem, where she would feel like a bird in a golden cage. The best prospect for her was to be in prison in the heat. She guessed that it was the idea of that strange man who had been following her everywhere and caught her after she escaped from prison. But even his pretty face could not save the situation. The woman asked the girl to get up from the floor because it was cold and Alice could get sick. In fact, the woman said it was a great honor to get a place in the harem, and such an opportunity should be welcomed. The girl yelled at the woman. She asked if the woman was out of her mind, how she could say such a thing. After all, a real man should have only one woman, and she had ended up in this stupid place. Where could a man allow himself to do such things with several girls or women at the same time? The attitude and treatment of women here was like they were toys. It was unfair and very hurtful to their dignity. The woman asked why Alice thought it was unfair. After all, the woman herself considered being taken into the harem as the highest honor that could be bestowed upon her. It was her desire to become Sihada's toy. Alice realized that there was no point in trying to prove anything to this woman. They had all been brainwashed, and now they couldn't hear anything except the voice telling them to obey their master. The girl fell onto the bed. She asked the maid why it was so quiet. The maid replied that Alice was now the only Ira in the harem. The girl asked again if she understood correctly that she was the only woman in the harem. The chief of the Dara arrived at Sikata. The man introduced himself to the ruler. His posture showed respect for the ruler. But the ambassador did not lose his sense of dignity, for which anyone who insulted him would surely be punished. The master of the house asked what had brought Dara to him. The man replied that he had heard rumors that Sihad had been able to visit and return from the sacred oasis of Ishmael, and therefore had come to pay his respects. But at the same time, rumors indicated that the master of the house had brought a white-skinned woman with him. In the past, only slaves could enter the harem. But how could a woman of low birth satisfy Sihad now? After all, being in his harem was a great honor for any girl or woman. Therefore, the rumors greatly surprised and confused Jalil. The master assured him that the rumors might be true. However, the words and their meaning that Dara had brought to Sikada were very offensive to the master. Such a thing could easily cost him his head. Sikad's hands were covered in blood. He looked fiercely at his guest. Jalil realized that he was on the verge of death. Sikad's aura was so dangerous that he could kill his enemy with just one glance. It was time to justify himself for the sake of his life. The man said that he was simply concerned for his master, to which Sikada replied that he did not need anyone's advice or concern. The man should get out of his house, otherwise he would not leave there alive. Sikad watched Jalil run away. The palace owner licked his bloody hand. He thought about how he would get even with Jalil for his words. And the next time he crossed his path, he would surely die. The girl lay in her room. She understood what a difficult situation she was in this time. In fact, her life was hanging by a thread. Everything that was happening to her now seemed very unfair to her. But she had to pull herself together and stop despairing every time. She had to find a way to escape from this madhouse. Alice could not become the wife of some simple, lustful man. The girl remembered how she managed to escape from the dungeon of the demons in the north. It had been so easy that she hadn't even broken a sweat while doing her dirty work. And escaping from such an open place was, in her opinion, a piece of cake. But there were two important details. The first was that she had lost all her belongings. Without them, even if she managed to escape, she would die in the desert. The second was the loss of her account book. Without it, she was in danger. She had made this artifact while she was still at home. The book was to be proof of her parents' power. She had to write down all her notes about routes and travel conditions in it. It was worth looking for. Without it, it was impossible to travel across the north of the continent, and there was no point even thinking about the south. So finding the book was her top priority. She also had to think about the magic earrings. Alice wanted to take them off, at least for a while. Otherwise, they might break from intensive use of magic. According to her calculations, the earrings should last another week. That meant she had to leave this place within a week. Where should she start? She needed to explore the area and understand the layout of the house. So it was time to act, not just sit around with her hands folded. Night fell. Alice looked up at the starry sky. She concluded that the moon in the south shone with a whiter light. In the north, it had a yellowish tint. The Sihada residence was extremely large. The entire house seemed to consist of a large number of smaller houses, all connected by passageways. This made it very difficult to find a way out of this veritable labyrinth. The place where her room was located was the most remote. Therefore, escape was not as easy as it seemed at first glance. Alice wondered who this man who lived in such a palace really was. She was also very curious as to why one person would need such a huge house. After all, in that case, its purpose was not just to be a home for one person. Guards would also have to patrol such a palace. Alice climbed over the fence and began to walk around the grounds of the house. It seemed as if there were no people here at all. The house and its purpose became more and more mysterious to her. The furnishings indicated that the owner was a powerful man. Alice went out into the garden. She wanted to see the beautiful garden that had beckoned her at night. Thanks to her many years of travel, the girl heard that there was someone else in the garden besides her. She decided to hide. It was a mystery who would be walking in the garden at such a late hour. And who could this mysterious guest be? Then the secret revealed itself. She noticed the psychopath who had caught her in the desert and taken her freedom. Sakid was coming out of the water. He was walking straight towards the bushes where the girl was hiding. She couldn't believe that he would manage to catch her again. The girl was shaking with fear. She had to get away as quickly as possible, but she didn't have time. The man watched her as she knelt and ran away from him, and according to him right now she looked most like a rat. Sahid asked why she was in the garden at this hour. Was she really a spy for the enemy? Alice began to justify herself when she realized that it was actually him who had kidnapped her in broad daylight and brought her to his estate. This man had no right to treat her like this, and he was the one accusing her of espionage and treason. Sahid said that in this country he could do whatever he wanted. The girl asked who he thought he was, God or the king of this country. The man replied that he was indeed the king of this country, and asked if she would now behave more quietly. He leaned toward Alice and said that his name was Sahid Bain Zaydad, and he was the true ruler of Pisian. The girl asked if he was Rakan, the living god of this country. Sahid praised her knowledge of her homeland. The master took the girl on his shoulders. She struggled and protested, but that did not stop him. Alice resisted, but the man would not let her go. She was outraged by this man's behavior toward a noble lady which she considered herself to be. Alice promised that he would be punished for his insolence. Sahid brought her to a room and laid her on the floor. He asked if she was really a spy from Cromwell. The girl realized that she had to deny any connection to her homeland. She agreed that she came from the northern continent. However, she was not a spy. The man asked what had brought her to Pesian. The girl replied that she simply wanted to visit the country's interesting and famous places. Alice said that she was an ordinary traveler, just traveling the world. She asked him to believe her words. Sihad said he would allow for that possibility. He asked if she wanted to seduce him. The girl noticed the man's strange gaze. His question confused her. She tried to influence him, but did not want to seduce him for that. She did not understand where the man was looking. He replied that she had previously claimed to be one of the most beautiful girls and women on the famous continent. Alcia remembered their meeting. She replied that at the time, Sikad had mocked her and her words as those of a conceited girl. He grabbed her by the neck. The man said that it was difficult for him to say whether she was really beautiful, but she had extremely beautiful eyes, for which one could easily kill a person. The girl was confused by his words. Sikad laid her on the table and stood over her. The man wanted to kiss the girl. Alice resisted, but she couldn't influence him in any way. The master was extremely strong, and the girl understood that if this continued, the consequences would be sad. She begged him to let her go. The man agreed. Instead, he said that he welcomed her to his harem. Alice didn't know how to react. She felt like she had fallen into a trap from which there was no escape, and now she was here forever. In the morning, the girl woke up with the feeling that someone was standing next to her. She saw an unfamiliar girl. She said her name was Nur, and that from now on, she was her new servant. It was a real honor for her to meet Era and serve her. But Alice's first thought was that Sihad had assigned this girl to her to watch over her mistress while she was in the house. Meanwhile, Nur was delighted with her mistress's skin. Alice asked the maid what the word Era meant. She replied that it was the name given to the women of Kuna. This meant that the girl had been given the status of a woman living in Sihad's palace and would carry out all his wishes, and she offered her congratulations on this occasion. Aira asked not to remind her of her master. She asked if she could ask Noor for a small favor. The girl was not used to such good treatment from her masters, and she felt uncomfortable with the gentle manner. Alice asked if Noor would accompany her everywhere from now on. After all, she had already devised an escape plan in her mind. She didn't need anyone following her around. But Noor replied that she would not be standing over her shoulder all day, and if she caused any inconvenience or got in the way, the Era could order her to leave and not interfere with her work. Alice breathed a sigh of relief. Nothing would prevent her from planning her escape. Noor left the room and told her mistress to enjoy her peace and rest. Alice thanked the girl and remained alone in her chambers. She still couldn't believe that she had become Sihada's servant in every sense of the word. The difference between the people of Cromwell and Pesiana was that in her homeland, people believed in the mystical goddess Lamesha. In Pesiana, however, a god monarch ruled, who was entirely flesh and blood and the ruler of all lands. Legends say that the inhabitants of Pesian believe in their monarch, who supposedly brings moisture to the desert, thereby saving the flora and fauna of this harsh region from destruction under the sun's rays. Here he is called Kun, and he is not just any king. Everything in this region, from politics and economics to cultural heritage, is under Kun's control. He is perceived as a true god in these lands. Alice couldn't believe that Ra-Kun was the same man she had been with that night. But even that didn't give him the right to do whatever he wanted with her. It really got on her nerves. He had no right to treat her like that. But the main thing she realized was that it was the first kiss of her life. In anger, she said that Kun should fall down the stairs and hit his butt on the floor for such despicable behavior so that he would know how to treat girls. Shida's assistant told his master that Jalil's behavior that day had not gone beyond what his opponent would have allowed. He was used to treating everyone that way, considering them inferior to himself. Their status did not matter to him at all. The man continued to talk about how to respond to Dahar's words. After all, they already knew very well what was going on in that man's head. His plans regarding the current government were as clear as day to Sahid. The ruler said that this time they would let the matter drop. Then they would see later where their opponent's arrogance would lead him. The assistant agreed and once again praised his master's wisdom. The conversation did not end there. The man said that, in his humble opinion, allowing the girl into the harem was a mistake and a very hasty and ill-considered decision. Even worse was that their relationship was developing very quickly. Something serious could come of it, and that would hinder Kuna's own development as it would distract him from his main affairs. In addition, the man who approached Sihad's assistant said that it would interfere with state affairs. After all, the Grand Vizier himself hoped that his daughters would get a place in the harem. Representatives of 6 other large aristocratic families also hoped that their daughters would become concubines of the great ruler. 48 families of lower status also cherished hopes that their daughters would become Kun's wives in the harem. Sikata said that he wanted to learn more about the biographies of all these girls in order to understand what kind of people they were. But before that, he ordered that Alice be brought to him. The woman who reported this to the maid noticed that she was very surprised. A mixture of emotions and feelings could be seen on her face. Alice walked down the corridor following the servant. The girl wondered when her escape plan would finally succeed. But before that, she had to eat well. And why did the ruler suddenly want to meet her? What did he want? And anyway, Alice thought, why should she obey her master's every command like a dog? Of course, she had to obey all the whims of her master, who was like a god to the local people. But she was not a toy and had her own will. The man sat on the throne. It seemed that he had been waiting for her for a long time. Sikati ordered the servants to leave them alone in the room. The girl was frightened that she would be alone again in the room with this man. She still remembered the kiss as well. The girl couldn't understand what was going through her master's mind. But Noor had already left the hall. Alice realized that for some reason she was ashamed to look the ruler in the eye. The man asked how long she would try to avoid eye contact with him. He asked how her first night in the harem had been. The girl realized that she had to play a role to calm Kuna down. She replied that she was not avoiding his gaze, but was simply preparing herself mentally to serve her master. As for her stay in the harem, her first night had been wonderful thanks to him. Suddenly, unexpectedly, even for Sahid himself, she asked how his night had been. No one had ever dared to speak to the great ruler of Pessian in such a manner. Kun said that if she liked it so much, he could give her the opportunity to stay in the harem forever and have every night as beautiful as this one. It was unclear whether he was joking or asking seriously. She thanked him for the offer, but refused. Sikad said that last night she reminded him of a rebellious cat. Today she was more like a docile lamb, which did not suit her very well. He asked Alice what she was really thinking, and asked her not to hide it from him. The ruler looked closely at the girl. He understood that everything his assistant Nasir had said was true. The girl was quite aggressive, but her manner of speaking and appearance were unusual, as was the aura around her. She could actually be the daughter of some nobleman from the north of the continent. He asked Alice what had brought her to Pisian. The girl replied as usual that she just wanted to travel and explore the world. Sihad didn't believe a word she said. He told her that if she tried to lie to him again, her mouth would be shut forever. He said he would repeat his question and wait for a truthful, honest answer from the Era. She was frightened by the look he gave her in such situations. It felt as if she was standing completely naked in front of him, unable to cover herself. She had never experienced such a feeling before. The only sensible thought that crossed Alice's mind on an intuitive level was that she needed to stay away from this terrifying man. He must really be a god. After all, she couldn't hide a single thought from him. The girl blurted out that she had heard from friends that Kratia was famous for its delicious dates. And since this fruit was rare in the north of the continent, she decided to travel to this amazing, exotic country. She was also curious about how it was possible to build a city in the middle of the desert where people could live, engage in various crafts and trade, and welcome guests from many other countries. Pisian impressed her. Alice hoped that at least one of her excuses, which she had just made up, would turn out to be true. But Sihad asked her if she really intended to cross the Great Desert, which had claimed the lives of many travelers for such silly reasons. In his opinion, no sensible person would dare to go to the desert for such ridiculous reasons. After all, it was certain to die there if you had no experience of traveling in similar cities. The man did not believe the Era. The people called the desert of death. Even the local traders tried to avoid traveling through this place for any reason, whether for trade or diplomacy. Therefore, Pisian was protected by the sands. They were interrupted by Sihada's assistant. He said that the royal vizier had arrived. The aristocrat demanded an audience with the great ruler. Kun ordered the king's messenger to be let in, but he had to wait a little. The girl remembered Kun's assistant. She had seen him at the market when the great ruler had caught her. But now she was mentally thanking this stranger for distracting Sihad from questioning her. But the assistant was already about to leave. Sikad ordered him to stay. He introduced the stranger to the Eri. The man's name was Nasir, and he was Sikad's personal vizier. He relied on his assistant as much as he relied on himself in all matters, from administration to personal affairs. Nasir said that he was very pleased to finally meet such a charming girl. He turned out to be not as unpleasant as he seemed at first glance. However, she could not completely trust him based on his appearance. The vizier said that at first he did not recognize the charming fugitive who had dared to leave prison under the scorching sun of Pessian in her new clothes. He said he was very happy for the ruler, who now had such a beautiful woman. Sikad ordered Nasir to take the girl to her chambers, as he had no time to talk now. He was expecting a messenger from the king, who could not have been sent here out of mere curiosity. But the girl felt that this was not the reason. The ruler and his assistant were finally left alone. Sihad said that the girl made him uneasy. There was nothing unusual about her. She behaved quite submissively, but there was a certain restlessness in her soul. Alice did not want to talk to him when he asked her questions. Each of her answers seemed to be pulled out with pliers. At the same time, she did not seem so closed off that she was afraid to communicate with people. Nasir was ordered to get her to talk and find out more about her and her past. He was interested in absolutely everything. Then, piece by piece, he would put together the whole picture. An assistant to a great ruler must obey orders. Alice entered the room where Nasir was working. The man asked her to sit down wherever she felt comfortable. He was working at his desk, and the girl was confused about what to do according to local customs When she was left alone in a room with a stranger, Nasir asked her where she had come from, if not from Cromwell. The girl replied that she was from Sigren. It was a small kingdom under the protectorate of Cromwell on the northern borders of this country. The assistant replied that he had never even heard of such a state. Alice said that her homeland was so small that practically only locals knew of its existence as a separate state with its own laws and culture. The girl thought she wasn't such a liar after all. She had stayed in Sigren when she was traveling north, so she hadn't actually lied about where she had come from to Pessian. She asked if she could ask him a few questions. Nasir was happy to tell her everything she wanted to know. Ira asked about the desert. The vizier replied that it was called the Jarda Desert. The place was deadly because of the complete lack of water and moisture. In addition, due to the strong winds that often change in this region, the geography of the desert itself changes, making it easy to get lost even for experienced travelers or locals who try not to go there without a good reason. Considering all these factors, an ordinary person would not be able to survive in this harsh place for even a few days. Death would come from dehydration. Before that, a person would wander among mirages and entertain themselves with illusions. The number of examples of those who have died in the desert is simply staggering. The Jara Desert has also become a place where all criminals sentenced to death are exiled. The exiles never return. The chances of surviving there are minimal. Nasir added that there was a legend among the locals that the desert was actually cursed, but he himself did not believe the rumors. In fact, he was trying to figure out if this woman was lying to him. He decided to test her further. The vizier asked if the girl knew that Kradia and Pisian were enemies. Alice replied that she had no idea. Rumors and information reached her country very slowly, so she could not know such details. She said that the books mentioned that Kratia was founded by people who opposed the creation of Pisian as an independent country. But she had heard about the state of war between these countries for the first time from the vizier at that moment. The man told her that a new conflict had recently broken out between the countries, and right now relations between the states had become the most tense in their entire history. Almost all civilized people knew about this enmity. The girl replied that the Northern Chronicles said little, almost nothing about it. News arrived very late and with very untrue accounts, which could not always be trusted. Now she understood why she had been mistaken for a spy. Among all the questions she had, she managed to ask King Pisian how to get to the enemy country with which there had recently been a clash on the border. The question itself put her in an awkward position, and after escaping from prison, suspicions could only grow. All these circumstances further hindered her plans to escape. And now she realized that she should be grateful that she had simply been put in prison and not something worse. Nasir asked if he could ask her something else. The question was more rhetorical in nature. He asked if her guides had not advised her to bypass the desert rather than go straight through it. Did all Northerners find it so easy to walk through the desert? The girl replied that they had told her something similar, but she had not listened and decided to take a shortcut. The vizier was now completely baffled. This behavior was strange for such an intelligent and knowledgeable girl. He was still thinking about why the girl had taken such a crazy step. However, he was more concerned that he could not determine whether the girl was telling him the truth or lying. The only thing Nasir was sure of was that she was lying about the reason for crossing the desert. The man tried in every way to see what was hidden behind the mask of the charming girl. He couldn't conduct the interrogation properly because he was distracted by the beauty of the girl sitting in front of him. Therefore, the information may not be objective. On the northern continent, the mountains had contours that constantly changed under the influence of various natural conditions. But the fields remained green all year round when it was warm outside. But what Alice's country did not have was a sea of sand. This was the reason for the girl's rash decision. The vizier understood what the girl was talking about. He was born and raised in the desert, but he had never thought about it in the way his opponent had. Nasir asked what impression the desert of death had made on the girl who had grown up in a country where such a geographical feature was a real wonder. Alice replied that the desert and their land were much more beautiful than she had imagined. She added that the landscapes and beauty of the desert had impressed her so much that she had even forgotten about the scorching sun. Her attention was completely focused on the sand dunes, which flowed like the sea under the influence of the wind. It was beautiful and amazing. That is why she was very surprised and began to wonder why the desert was called the Desert of Death. Nasir believed her words. He was confused by the fact that the girl called such a place beautiful. Surely she was the only one who thought so. Alice understood that no one who looked into her eyes could fail to believe her words. The vizier added that they had found her bag. The girl was overjoyed that her belongings would now be returned to her. However, something seriously troubled her. Nasir said that they were returning her belongings that did not arouse suspicion. But there were some things that he and the guards had to keep. The girl was not worried about the account book, because it was under a powerful spell of concealment and disguise. The vizier said he was glad to talk to her. He had no more questions for now, but he hoped they would meet again soon. He promised to do everything in his power to make that happen. The girl thanked him for his company. Nasir summoned one of Sihad's most loyal servants. He ordered the young man, whose name was Karim, to keep an eye on the harem for a while. After all, the lady from the north would now be living here, although it was difficult for her to stay in one place all the time. The young man was not enthusiastic about this idea. He considered it an insult to his dignity, as Karim came from a family of desert guards. These people differed from other desert dwellers in that they were constantly fighting for their very existence. They served Rakun faithfully. It did not matter to them that they belonged to another clan or had families. These warriors were called conquerors, and Karim was one of the most powerful warriors of this clan. He did not understand how a foreign woman could cause such a commotion, and, more importantly, attract the attention of the great and powerful Sihad, the god of the lands of Pessian. Nasir noticed the disappointment in the warrior's eyes. The vizier said that after talking to the girl, he found some things suspicious and very strange, things that needed further investigation. The reason for her visit to their country remained unclear, and it was strange that she was traveling alone. Karim asked why she could not simply be killed if she aroused suspicion. The vizier replied that despite all the oddities, she was not a spy for an enemy state, and therefore simply killing her was not an option. Nasir added that this was not his whim, but an order and command from the most powerful cicada himself. The ruler probably had a reason to take this girl so seriously and have certain plans for her, and it was not for nothing that she had been transferred to the harem. The warrior's refusal was not accepted. Elisa was in her room wondering if Nasir believed her story. He was not a bad man, but something about him troubled her. Considering how she had behaved before, suspicions about her could easily arise. The situation she found herself in was very strange. In fact, Cradia and Cromwell were mortal enemies, but they could only unite in one situation, to oppose Pessian in a bloody battle. She was worried that when her identity was revealed, and she knew everything she had been told about Cratia, her family would be in danger, and her entire country would be on the brink of collapse and defeat in its eternal struggle. Her parents would never allow the country to be destroyed because of some conflict. However, her father, who had supported her desire to travel, would not be pleased that she had found herself in such a situation and caused problems. She thought about how to get out of this situation. There was a knock at the door. Nur asked to come in. Alice asked what the maid wanted. The girl said that the warrior who would guard her was already there. Ira realized that it was Sihada's bodyguard. The mistress ordered the girl to let the conqueror in. When he entered the room, his gaze asked what this girl was doing here. It was difficult for the man to hide his emotions. He had not been taught to do so. But she was used to such reactions. Many people in a situation like this are not very happy to see foreigners in their country, especially when there is a possibility that the foreigner is a spy for an enemy country. The girl said she was glad to meet the legendary warrior. Ira knew that in this country, when you don't know who you're dealing with, you have to be polite and submissive to others. After all, you don't know who he might be in this land. Otherwise, you could get into trouble. The girl apologized for not covering her face. She said she was still not used to the local customs. Ira asked him to be understanding and put himself in her shoes. Karim did not expect a girl who had managed to escape from prison to be so delicate and beautiful. He couldn't understand how she, with such a delicate and seemingly weak body, had managed to escape from prison on her own. He was even more curious about how she had made her way from the north to their lands. It was simply hard to believe. The guard bowed and asked for forgiveness for his rudeness and manners. After all, when you live in the desert among warriors like himself, you become rough and uncouth, like everyone else around you. Finally, he introduced himself to the girl. The girl asked him to call her by her real name if possible. It would be very nice for her. The man replied that he would be happy to do so. He assured her that he would stand guard over the harem and that she could call him at any time. The girl was left alone in the room. Now her escape plan could fail completely. In addition to Nur, another person had been assigned to her, and this warrior would be much more dangerous than the girl servant. The prospects for escape were poor. She became even more anxious. So she decided to take a walk. Sitting in one place would not change anything. At the same time, she would be able to explore the surrounding area and perhaps come up with something to add to her escape plan. Sikhat appeared out of nowhere behind her. She thought that he was the last person she wanted to see there. The girl asked him not to follow her anymore. Ira was indeed under suspicion, but it was not necessary to follow her. Alice asked the ruler what he was doing here at this hour. Besides, she thought he was entertaining the king's vizier. But Kun said he didn't have to justify coming to his harem. But the girl asked what the real reason was for him being near her chambers during the day. And if it was a matter of checking up on her, then Nasir should have told him everything. Unless they did not agree on the truth of Ira's words. The man replied that he really wanted to see his concubine. The girl couldn't believe his words. She thought that Mr. Raccoon had lost his mind. Sihad looked at her and realized that it was never boring with this woman. Sihad understood that he usually saw only two emotions in other people's eyes, fear or a desire to please in order to save their lives. But this woman was unlike any other. She was impossible to confuse with anyone else. This time, he felt different around her than he had before. His concubine's aura captivated him with its ambiguity. He saw himself reflected in her eyes. Their connection seemed so close to him. He was struck by how naturally she looked at him. There was not even a spark of fear in her eyes, nor any desire to please him in order to gain some kind of benefit. Sikade asked how the girl felt in his harem, even though she was the only one there. The girl felt a little uncomfortable with such closeness to Kuna. She asked how long he planned to hang around her. But the ruler couldn't take his eyes off the girl's beauty. He was even offended that she felt uncomfortable around him. Or maybe Alice felt very insecure because he was a man, and she had never been so close to a man before. And then there was their kiss. This made him very curious and intrigued. Now he wanted to be close to her. The girl said that if she had known who the man she met in the desert was, she would never have asked him for directions to the neighboring country. The man agreed that it was strange. A lonely woman who had crossed the desert. But he was more interested in something else. Cicade asked how she managed to escape from the prison where he had put her. After all, no one had ever managed to do that before. And he would not accept the explanation that it was pure luck. The girl said that breaking the lock on the cell door was not difficult. It was very simple and weak, and the gate to the compound was wide open, so that was not a problem. At that time, Alice did not feel the consequences of her actions. The man warned her again that she would be punished for lying. The girl replied that she was well aware that she could get into trouble after lying to her master about the reasons and circumstances of her escape. Alice asked what she should do to get Sikad to stop interrogating her. He said that she should simply provide evidence. She had to bring something that would prove her innocence in all of this, that she had raised a fuss. Then he would leave her alone. In reality, Ira thought that she would rather run away from this cursed place than look for some evidence and prove her innocence and non-involvement in some crime that had been fabricated against her. It was simply absurd. That night, Sihad stayed in the harem. The girl couldn't sleep for a second because of the man's presence in her room. She wished that this man would leave her room. She hoped that this night would be the only one in her life. The next day, the girl went for a walk with Nur. Elisa couldn't believe that the harem building itself was so huge. Nur asked if her mistress didn't know that the harem was supposed to house the ruler's wives with their children and servants. Moreover, not only Sakata's wives were supposed to live in the harem, but also orphaned girls whom he had taken under his guardianship. That was why the building was so spacious and simply enormous by the standards of the northern kingdoms. Alice wondered if Kun made the orphan girls his concubines when they grew up. Nur replied that this sometimes happened, but usually the ruler married such girls to important aristocrats. In this way, he arranged their lives. There were 6 supreme leaders in Pision and 48 lower-ranking leaders. Kun offered them and their relatives family ties in order to strengthen his power in the country. The girl asked if there was anyone in the palace she should be wary of. She remembered Sihada's words that he was the most powerful man in the country. However, he did not want to keep anyone close to him because he did not want to increase the number of people who disliked him. There was no need for that. Alice wondered who was next in the hierarchy after Sakata. She thought it must be the Grand Vizier. Only this man treated the ruler of the palace as an equal. The vizier was a confident and cold politician. At the reception that was taking place at that very moment, Grand Vizier Gedik apologized for being late. However, Sakata replied that life was turbulent, and no one could say with certainty what would happen to a person in the next moment. Sikad added that it must have been very difficult for the vizier to look after the country while he was away. The vizier thought to himself that Kun was mocking him and wished him all the worst for his manner of communicating with such an important person. Gedik said that he was still going to throw a grand banquet in honor of the return. Sikade replied that he did not need such ceremonies, but the vizier said that he should not say so. After all, the pilgrimage that the ruler had undertaken was a difficult thing. Danger lurked at every turn for Kuna, and no one even wanted to think about crossing the desert of death. All the people of Pision prayed and fasted for the safe return of their ruler from his long journey. The pilgrimage to the sacred oasis was a very dangerous undertaking, and since Kun went there once every few years, the people of his country left all their affairs and thought only of the fate of the ruler of Pision. Their prayers ask for Sihad to return from his journey safe and sound. They wish him a successful passage through the deadly desert with all its traps. But the worst thing that could happen is that the ruler would leave them forever. After Kuna's return from his journey, a banquet is held that can last up to 2 weeks. Everyone rejoices that their ruler has returned safely. The people are glad that their deity has not abandoned his servants to their fate and has not deprived them of his protection forever. But Sihad said that he had another reason to throw a banquet for all the important and respected families of the country. Kun promised to supervise the preparations himself, so that no one else would be burdened with the hassle. Finally, the man asked if he could offer his daughter to the ruler. The vizier asked if Kun remembered his daughter, Jakia. Her beauty had just blossomed and was blooming like a flower in spring. Sihad had previously said that he was not ready for marriage. Kun had never paid attention to women before. However, the vizier's daughter could now remedy that. Sihad was impressed that a person he hardly knew was trying to openly win him over. The ruler replied that he understood the vizier's good intentions. However, now was not the time to discuss these issues. Besides, he had promised not to let anyone else into his harem. The aristocrat did not understand Kun's words. Sikade said that was enough for today. Alice was sitting in the garden. She felt someone's gaze on her. However, there was no one around. She realized that ordinary people could not see her unseen companions. They were hidden from her behind a veil. Suddenly, she noticed Karim standing right next to her. Alice asked him if he wasn't supposed to be guarding the harem door. The girl began to ask why the man was spying on her and asked him to tell Sahad to stop. Deep down, she wanted to mock these naive men who thought she was a fool and hoped to catch her in the act of trying to escape or do something unusual. And Alice decided to act. She looked flirtatiously into the guard's eyes and said that he was extremely attractive and too handsome to be just an ordinary guard. The girl asked if the guard had a girlfriend. This question put Karim in an awkward position. Alice continued to say that he must be very popular with women and girls. Ira's plan was coming to fruition. She wanted to distract the guard so much that he would leave. Alice reached for Karim's weapon and grabbed it. The gesture was ambiguous and greatly disturbed Karim. He did not expect such behavior from a noble lady. Ira asked what this large object was, a yataghan or a shashmir. She asked to take a look at it. Karim was a true professional warrior and had strict, almost iron discipline, but his charge's behavior threw him off balance. He knew exactly what to do when he encountered his mortal enemy. But he was powerless against the girl. Alice was still bombarding the warrior with questions. She was interested in how he became a tamer, and everything related to it. Even Nur was tired of listening to the girl's chatter. The questions were becoming increasingly meaningless, and the maid couldn't take it anymore. A voice behind them distracted both of them. They were asked when they had become such good friends. Cicada had approached almost silently. Or perhaps the girl's babbling had drowned out the footsteps of the ruler, who had decided to check on the harem. He was followed by Nasir. The man asked Kun where he had rushed off to and why he had left so abruptly. But the ruler did not hear him. He asked if the girl had really fallen in love with her bodyguard. The question sounded a little strange and harsh. The guard asked the girl to be cautious and not say anything that could provoke Sihad. It was a very tense moment. After all, Kun was never ready to give up what he had set his sights on just like that. Karim was worried for himself and Elisa. The girl told the ruler that women always liked strong knights. They were fascinated by brave and powerful warriors, and Karim was a real handsome man. The warrior did not know what to do at that moment. He expected the wrath and anger of his master. Alice asked if Sihad had come here to hear these words. Or perhaps he was interested in the type of men that the princess preferred. Sihad was captivated by the sharpness of the questions and the tone with which the girl spoke to him. Nasir peeked out from behind his master's shoulder and said that he was the one who had been trying to talk to Alice. It was clear that the servant was trying to justify his master. The latter was trying hard not to show his embarrassment. The vizier said that he had a few questions about the northern continent. He was very curious to learn more about the places where the girl came from. Alice said that she was not ready to tell him just like that. The vizier looked at his ruler. He asked the girl what she wanted in exchange for the information. Alice was delighted that Nasir had fallen for her provocation. She asked for her bag, which had been taken and not returned to her yet. The men were shocked by this request. They couldn't understand what was so unusual about the bag. After all, the girl could have asked for anything she wanted in her position. Sihad said that some of the items in the bag were under powerful spells. Alice decided that there was no point in hiding anything anymore. She had to tell them everything she had been keeping secret from them. Ira gathered her strength and said that the bag contained her underwear and other feminine items. That was why it was cursed. Sihad began to laugh. He replied that she was indeed very unpredictable. Life with her would certainly never be boring. The ruler ordered that his concubine's bag be returned. Nasir rushed to carry out the order. Alice and the vizier sat at the table. On the table were dates, specially picked for the girl. Ira asked what exactly Nasir wanted to know about midnight. The man said he had a few questions about Cromwell. He assured the girl that she could tell him anything that came to mind. Everything would be useful, and in time, falsehoods and inaccuracies would be discarded. Alice decided to tell him some well-known facts about her country. Her story touched on Cromwell's politics, culture, and religion. In fact, this country was a true paradise on earth. Evergreen trees and flowers, lush grass, and enchanting, picturesque landscapes delighted the people who lived there and travelers. The people of the country were simply extraordinary. From the very beginning of their lives, every child felt pride in their homeland. This feeling was further deepened in school and other educational institutions. Alice herself fell deeply in love with this country during her travels. There were two powerful and influential families in Cromwell. They ruled the country. The Cardionis were a family of knights. The Astateas were scholars and philosophers. Thanks to the protection of these two influential families, the imperial family remained invincible, and no one could oppose its power and strength. Order and discipline reigned in the country. That is why the political situation within the state was stable. The most interesting thing about Cromwell's politics was that there had never been any uprisings or popular movements dissatisfied with the situation in the country. The principles of governance were quite diplomatic. Nasir thanked him for the interesting story. The information he received was quite amusing and valuable for his political worldview. In his opinion, the lady also knew a lot about Cromwell. This aroused his suspicions. The girl said that almost everyone living in the north of the continent knew what she had told him. In other words, She had shared fairly mediocre information that was known even to children in that region. The vizier said that was enough for today. He had already obtained a lot of valuable information. Next time, he expected to hear many more interesting things. Aisha did not expect there to be a next time. She began to feel afraid. The girl asked when she would get her bag back. The vizier replied that the bag would be returned when he had received answers to all the questions he was interested in. Alice realized that she had been deceived. Nasir said that he would return the item when he deemed it necessary. It seemed that she was back in the same situation where it all began. The girl was still watching the guard walking around. She was struck by the disorganization of the guards. Their patrol times were constantly changing, but she still hadn't given up on her plan to escape from the palace. Once she had all the information about the patrol times and routes, everything would work out. The only question was how to get to Surte, the town that divided the north and south of the continent. But let's return to the current situation. Problems must be solved as they arise. Now she had to figure out how to escape from this place. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The strange thing was that she didn't see anyone around her. And Alice was sitting high up on the roof, where no one could see her. She had worked so hard to get here, and now someone had discovered her secret. However, there was no need to panic just yet, but eventually the mystery was solved. The girl noticed the Grand Vizier in the company of an unfamiliar man. They were talking quietly and seemed to be conspirators planning something against Kun. The vizier's companion said that it was most likely a small animal rustling. However, they should not neglect the security of their business, so they would discuss the details next time they met. It was necessary to be cautious. Alice was swimming in the pool, thinking about the men she had seen the night before during her walk. Fortunately, they hadn't seen her, but she had an uneasy feeling. At the same time, she didn't want to get involved with these people. The stranger's gaze gave the impression that a snake had wrapped its slimy tail around her body and was about to strike. The girl didn't even want to see this person again, let alone meet him in public. To make matters worse, her earrings had changed color. Era knew that there was very little mana left inside them, but she didn't think it was that little. According to her calculations, the charge should have lasted another week or more. She decided that she had no choice but to remove her earrings for a while to save energy. But it would be difficult to hide the changes in her appearance in the usual way. It all starts with the eyes. Although this metamorphosis is not as noticeable as a change in hair and skin color in general. Noor said she had forgotten to tell her mistress something. Raccoon had been waiting for her for some time, and Alice wondered why his visits had become so frequent. When Sihad came to her, the girl asked why he came to her so often, as if he wanted to find out something important or where a treasure was hidden. The man replied that he had every right to visit his favorite concubine. Alice asked him not to laugh at her. However, she didn't care about Kun's jokes and mockery. The ruler asked if her long, beautiful hair didn't get in the way of her travels. After all, it needed constant care and attention. The girl replied that the next time she went on a journey, she was going to cut it off. Alice was only afraid that her family and friends would not understand this, because they believed that a lady should have long, beautiful hair. The man asked if she was the only child in her family, and what kind of relatives the girl was talking about. Era said that she had many cousins and sisters, and they were so close that they were like her own brothers and sisters. Sikad asked if her real name was Alice. The girl asked in surprise why he was interested. He replied that there were many things he did not know about her yet, but he hoped to learn more over time. That was why he was trying to spend time with her. The girl laughed. She thought that lying in such a situation was too much. The ruler noticed that Alice was not selfish or overly confident by nature. He had never met anyone like her before in his life. Aira told him about her parents, and how her father had chosen her name 3 months before she was born. She spoke warmly and tenderly about her parents. The name Alice meant from the ancient light, and blessed. Sikad said that it seemed to him that a girl like her had grown up in an atmosphere of love and respect between her parents. Unlike him, who had survived only thanks to his own endurance and willpower. He simply had to survive, but now he was curious why a girl who had lived in such an atmosphere had decided to leave her home. It was very strange and unusual to him. Instead of a cozy home, she had chosen to wander through a dangerous world. Alice was not taken aback. She asked him why he was always at home. He didn't like the tone she used. She asked if he didn't like the way she addressed him. The girl asked what the word Sihad meant, since Nasir also used that name for the ruler. The man replied that the word meant my God. Alice was surprised by the man's directness and frankness. Ira asked how she should address the man. He replied that his full name was Sihad Zain Behdad. The girl asked if she could call him Behi, from Behdad. Sikade said it sounded nice. Alice changed her position. She asked why the man was asking her so many questions. Surely the great ruler had nothing better to do than waste his time on such useless questions. The answer stunned her. The man said that he liked her very much. She asked him not to say things he didn't understand. Sikadi asked why she thought he was talking about things he didn't understand. Suddenly he pushed her against the wall and kissed her. Alice still couldn't understand why he was acting so unexpectedly. It even scared her. It was dangerous, and she had to step back to increase the distance between them. But Cicada himself stepped back from the girl. He realized that he had given in to his weakness. If he hadn't pulled himself together and stepped back in time, he could have found himself in a difficult situation. He never allowed anyone to control him. It was unbecoming of a ruler. But at the same time, he couldn't stop thinking about who this girl was to him. His feelings for her were quite strange, and she was too timid when it came to men. She was inexperienced in matters of the heart. Alice did not understand why she did not have the same experience with men as her peers, who already had extensive knowledge on the subject. Behi added that otherwise, he would not have backed away after kissing her. The girl couldn't understand why he was acting this way toward her. But Banquet said that he liked her very much, and therefore he couldn't resist being tempted by her beauty and charm. In fact, he had noticed a change in the color of her eyes, and he pretended that nothing terrible had happened. Also, because he liked her very much, he did not force her to do anything that might upset or hurt her. Alice thought that the changes in her appearance were not noticeable, and no one would notice the difference unless they looked closely at her. But Sihad was too interested in her to see the small changes that had taken place. She pretended not to understand what the man was talking about. The girl went to the mirror. The question of how to respond to the ruler's accusation was spinning in her head. The girl was on the verge. It seemed that the man was actually testing her for lying. Again. He couldn't be blamed for that, considering the circumstances of their first meeting and her request regarding the enemy country. Alice turned back to the ruler. She asked if everything was all right with his eyesight. After all, she hadn't noticed the slightest change in the mirror, and all his suspicions had once again proved groundless. But Sihad said he couldn't help noticing the difference, because he always looked into her eyes. They had captivated him from their first meeting, and now Behi often thought of those eyes. They haunted him, stirred his imagination, and made his blood boil. And it was then that he realized one thing about this woman. Thoughts of other women completely disappeared from his mind. Elisa's behavior surprised him. She always had security guards around her when he was nearby. However, she did not push him away when he sought intimacy. She was definitely not deceiving him. But at the same time, she didn't prove much to him. There was a certain vagueness between them. This confused him even more. In fact, inside him raged a desire to be alone with her and see no one else in the world. Sikad couldn't understand who this girl really was, and he wanted to dance to her tune. She filled almost all of his free space. Behi decided to back down from his intention and position and said that he might have been wrong. That night, the man asked her to tell him why she had left her home and started traveling. Alice said that the world she lived in was so beautiful and inspiring. Living in one place was boring. This was an unfamiliar position for the man, as he had spent his entire life in one place and could not imagine setting out to travel. The girl replied that she understood him. She herself seemed strange to many people. Alice asked when Behi was going to leave her room. He asked why he should leave his harem and why she saw a problem with that. She said she couldn't sleep with a stranger lying next to her. He held her tightly. The man told her to go to sleep and not be afraid, unless she wanted to return to where they left off last time. Alice didn't know what to say. The girl thought it would be wonderful if she had free time at night. But because of the ruler's frequent visits, she couldn't leave her room in the harem. His presence weighed heavily on the girl. She had to figure out how she would do it during the day. The next morning, Alice asked the maid if she thought everyone seemed to be bustling about too much. Nur replied that everyone was preparing for a banquet that was to take place soon. It was being organized by a great ruler. The banquet was being held to celebrate Sakata's safe return from the deadly desert. A grand festival was to take place in the palace and beyond. The girl thought it would be a great opportunity to slip out of the palace and escape. Considering the crowd of people who would come to celebrate the return of their beloved ruler, who was considered a god and protector of these lands, no one would notice her disappearance. The plan came together on the day of the banquet. All that remained was to get rid of anyone who could follow her that day. She couldn't shake the feeling that Kareem was somewhere nearby. She could sense him constantly. The great warrior never took his eyes off his charge during the day. He didn't want to anger Sahad. Kareem had been trying to avoid contact with the girl ever since Sakata had nearly killed him, with a glance for simply being near him. But the girl herself was very persistent. She constantly tried to be near him and flirt with him in every way possible. In fact, Alice was trying to get the bodyguard to just leave her alone. She deliberately annoyed him with her silly questions. The bodyguard asked her what he could do for her. Ira said that she was still very interested in learning more about the mighty warriors of the desert. He said he understood her interest, but that it was important to spend less time together so as not to anger the ruler. Nur watched the couple. She couldn't understand how Ira could flirt so openly with the guard. Didn't she realize that this would cause a huge scandal and anger the ruler? What would she do when Sihad found out? Lady Jakia came to visit. She said she had come to welcome her master back. The lady asked Alice if she was really the ruler's new heiress. The stranger said she was pleased to meet her. Jakia was the eldest daughter of the Grand Vizier Gedik Ahmed. Alice thought that this girl was really very beautiful. Her beauty was not like that of the women and girls of the north. It was a southern model of tenderness and femininity. Her long, wavy hair and beautiful eyes that penetrated to the very depths of the soul and did not give rest were worth 1,000 words. Her delicate features made it impossible to look at her calmly. Various thoughts arose in his head as he stood next to her.